All right, it's the Security Weekly News, episode 248. I'm Doug White, and welcome to the week of 16 October 2022. We've got YeBots, BlackLotus, Venus, ESXI, Act4shell, women get paid less, Zoom, ICS growth, along with Jason Wood on the Security Weekly News. Stick around.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100 today, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cyber criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of the 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection by going and getting your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Oh, welcome to the Security Weekly News. I'm Doug White. Today we got BlackLotus is a new UEFI boot kit that is apparently being sold by someone on hacking forums. It's got a cool name, cool picture, and so forth. This boot kit is being sold for $5,000 and it claims to have, this is like marketing, it claims to have a secure boot bypass. Okay, that's pretty good. A Ring 0 kernel protection against removal. Okay, that's pretty impressive. And that it will persist in recovery or safe mode, which I guess goes along with Ring 0 kernel protection. But, I mean, wow. It also claims that it has anti-virtual machine code, anti-debug, code obfuscation, and other features which could prevent you from analyzing it. So the seller goes on to claim that the security software cannot detect it, that no security software will see it, and it won't stop it because it runs under the system account with a legit process. So now how much would you pay? And they'll throw in a set of Ginsu knives if you buy it before midnight tonight. But wait, there's more. Before you pick up the phone to call, the boot kit also claims to be only 80 kilobytes in size once it's on the disk and says it can disable built-in Windows security protections such as hypervisor protected code integrity, Windows Defender, and user account control. So, I mean, what can it do? I mean, the seller then went on to say, patching this vulnerability by adding it to the UEFI revocation list is currently impossible, and the vulnerability will affect hundreds of bootloaders that are being used today. Kaspersky said that this looked like an APT working for a state entity. So they mentioned GRU, they mentioned APT41. So nobody's really sure exactly who's selling this or who developed it, but they several times said that it looked like toolkits that might be in use by a nation state. So who knows, or it could be the Iranians or somebody else. But they mentioned GRU and APT40. APT41 is China, and GRU, of course, being Russia. So watch out for that. Venus ransomware is targeting publicly exposed remote desktop services. Imagine that. But, and I immediately read that and I went, wait, are people still doing that? They're still taking RDP and exposing it to the internet? I mean, I really thought we had that under control and we'd had that conversation enough that people weren't still doing that, but they are. Malware Hunter team found this malware, apparently started up in August of this year, but they went on and said there was another ransomware that uses the same file extension, .venus, that had been around since 2021. So it may just be a reissue or an update of some other piece of software. They did not say what that other piece of software was called, but apparently it wasn't called Venus. The ransomware adds the text "good gamer" at the end of the file contents. So if you're seeing files with the words "good gamer" in them, or file extensions with .venus, that's probably what this is. The ransomware targets RDP, even if it's not running on standard ports like 3389, 3390 kind of stuff that you would typically see. So even that won't protect you if you try that old saw about, nobody will find it because you ran it on port 6969. Right. No, nobody can ever figure out what's running on other ports if they're not standard ports. I love it when people tell me that. I've heard that so many times. They're just like, we're running FTP, but we're running it on port 300. And you're like, so? And they're like, well, nobody will ever figure that out. I'm like, no, of course not. No, nobody ever wrote a port scanner or learned how to port scan. Yeah. The article didn't say exactly how the ransomware is targeting RDP or what mechanism they're using to get to it, but they said it most definitely targets RDP. So don't expose your RDP, okay? Keep it in your VPN. I mean, really, it's just, how many times do we have to say this? If you're running ESXI, the VMware hypervisor for bare metal, well, as of 15 October, versions prior to 6.7 have now reached end of life. And so they will no longer receive any security updates or patches. They will continue to receive tech support until next year, but there will be no more security updates. And based on the past history of these things, that's pretty scary. According to Landsweeper, who did a survey, there are 79,000 installed ESXi servers at the 6,000 clients that they actually looked at. And of those 79,000 ESXi servers, 28,835 of them are running version 6.7, and 17,000 or so are on 6.5. So those two versions came out in 2018 and 2016, respectively. The total count of 45,654 ESXi servers hit the end of life mode on the 15th of this month. So they are now end of life. So just saying, if you're running all these old versions, you might want to consider updating. But I do appreciate that is a really arduous task, having upgraded one of mine from 6.7 to the 7 version last summer, and I wasn't even supporting a whole pile of users, and so it was kind of like it's a really upgrading those things is not something you take lightly, and actually going from the 6 versions to the 7 may require hardware updates as well, because that was what it required for me, because the 6.7 version I had was running on hardware that was not supported on the 7 versions, so I actually had to buy a new server and put all that in place. So it's not exactly something you just do overnight. So start thinking about how you're gonna map that out. So this one, I guess, surprised me a little bit, but then it didn't. Globally, so this was a study. Globally, women make up about 25% of the cyber workforce. And this was a study from ISC Squared. So that's the people that do CISSP and stuff. They did the study in 2021 and are just now and putting out the results. And it sounds kind of bad. 25% is certainly not representative of the overall percentages in the population. But in 2017, when they first did the study, only 11% of the cybersecurity workforce was female. So they had a significant increase between 2017 and 2021, although it wasn't, I presume, as much of an increase as people had hoped. The study went on to show that they were trying to sort of suss this out. The study went on to show that women leave the cybersecurity profession at much higher rates than men. And I was pretty shocked in my privileged ivory tower, comfy old white guy chair. I was kind of like, really? Isn't this like 2022? But and then guess what? The study also found that women get paid less than men. And I was like, really? I know I've heard this for years, but I just was seeing it right there on paper, and I was thinking we were doing better than that. But it also said that women are denied career advancement opportunities much more commonly than men are. And I was like, wow, the 19th century called and wants all its bad policies and ideas back. Microsoft did a study that found that more than 54% of the women they surveyed said that the industry has a serious gender bias problem, which is believable. And of course, the gender bias part leads to unequal pay and support. 83% of the respondents to their survey said that they believe there is opportunity for women in cyber, but only 44% of them feel that they are sufficiently represented in cyber. which I mean, all those numbers make a lot of sense. I mean, there's only one thing that should be used as a gauge: your skills. I mean, literally. Like, if you're hiring people, I don't know why you're looking at things like, well, we can't hire them. But there was a lot of interesting stats in this study where even women were reporting that they didn't feel women were as good at some of these jobs. And I'm like, well, I mean, but look, skills are what matter. Everything else is silly. But apparently we aren't doing so well in this. So why don't we make it a real agenda item to work on doing better in our field? We can't account for some of these other fields, but I mean, at least in our cybersecurity field. And I feel like we're doing a bit better. But then again, I'm an old white guy, so what are you going to do? But let's work on this, okay? Now, despite all the stories that you've been seeing about the market softening for tech and cyber, and Microsoft announced a bunch of layoffs today, and there's been a general downturn in hiring and whatnot. According to this article that also had a study in it, the industrial cybersecurity market is expected to grow massively over the next decade, which doesn't surprise me a bit, right? So you might want to brush up on your 6LoWPAN skills. Incidentally, that's my DJ name, so you can't have it. But the industrial security market is currently estimated to be valued around $16 billion. And there's different estimates of all this stuff, of course. But according to more conservative estimates, which were the ones I decided to look at, the market is supposed to grow to around $20.1 billion in 2027. So that's a pretty big chunk increase over 16. Another group said $22.4 billion by 2028. And some of the higher projections were estimating maybe $33.5 billion in that industrial cybersecurity market by 2028. And I see 2028 and I think, wow, the distant future. But I'm like, no, that's actually just like about 5 years from now. So over that next 5-year period, massive growth in that industrial control system market. And, with both the increased growth in the use of IoT devices in those OT networks and increased targeting of all those types of infrastructure networks by criminal and foreign governments and so on and so forth, well, you can do the math. So, this is maybe a place to start focusing if you're trying to move forward in your career, because I think there's going to be a lot of hiring in those critical industries. And it's going to be a lot of that esoteric stuff like 6LoWPAN and things like that we're going to need to know more about. Future Market Insights is an executive summary that forecasts the ICS security market to be around $43.5 billion by 2032. They did say that South Asia and the Pacific region are probably going to experience the highest rates of growth. So, definitely something to keep in your back pocket if you're thinking about moving forward. Zoom rolled out a high-priority patch for Mac OS with a warning that said hackers could abuse a software flaw, and they are patching it. If hackers get into this app, they can connect to and control Zoom apps that are running on Macs. The vulnerability is described as a debugging port configuration that is opened by the Zoom client on Mac OS. So I guess when you start Zoom, it opens a debugging port. And typically debugging ports are ways for developers to connect to apps, and when they're testing them. And so this is like that old thing they called a maintenance hook, or the original, which were the original backdoors and things like that. So very similar to that. The bug affects Zoom clients for meeting for Mac OS starting with version 5.10.6 and prior to version 5.12. A patch for this that included patches for other bugs was released yesterday. So if you are running Zoom on Macs in your organization or you're running it personally, it would be advisable to patch up your Zoom device right away. This article went in both directions for me in terms of just how crazy is it. It was initially described as another Log4shell and said this one was reported in Apache Commons text. So this new problem is based around that ACT open source Java library, which is used to assist in something that we all hate, which is working with strings. So that's the bane of everyone's existence who has been a programmer for very long, is any kind of dealing with strings. And I know some languages do that better than others, but the ACT is a library that people use on their websites to deal with strings. GitHub Security Lab found the problem back in March and they described it as an arbitrary code execution vulnerability, which is related to untrusted data processing and variable interpolation. So this is another one of those things where you can inject things, I guess, into those fields and cause other things to happen. The flaw was patched just this week that brings Apache Commons text to version 1.10.0. So you need to check your version if you're using this, and if you're supporting websites that have Java, which is pretty much everything, you may well have this library in place. The problem is being called Text4shell or Act4shell, depending on who you ask. Rapid7, though, came out with a report on it, and they said that it was not comparable to Log4shell since it is, quote, rare that an application uses the vulnerable component of Commons text to process untrusted and potentially malicious input, end quote. They said that they tested it against various versions of JDK and that their proof of concept only worked on a very small number of versions. Sophos, though, came in and said, quote, it's like Log4shell all over again, end quote. But then they went on to sort of hedge that and say exploiting it was not easy. So it may be one of those vulnerabilities that you see, and unlike Log4j, which was very easy to exploit, was all over the place, this one maybe not so much, but there was a lot of stories about it. So, but regardless, if you're using ACT on your websites, patch it, please. Really. Well, his poetry has won him acclaim and derision around the world. His poem, Ode to a Really Sexy Tree with All That Dirty, Dirty Moss Hanging All Over It While I Roll Around in These Oak Leaves and Acorns, is considered both erotic and vastly disturbing in ways that make many readers want to take a hot bath or roll around in tree bark, depending on their viewpoint. Please welcome Jason Wood.
Hey, everybody. As always, good to be back with you. The Register actually published an article today about the links between the ransomware cartel, which is a threat actor group, and Revil, which is a little bit of a blast from the past. The story basically cites several different security vendors who all observe that ransomware cartel definitely has some kind of tie between them and Revil, but they aren't sure exactly how that connection was established or what went on there. One of the observations, and probably this is really the primary bit that they're looking at here, is the ransomware cartel has access to the Revil source code, but they are missing some techniques or that Revil used, in such as like their obfuscation engine and how they basically tried to evade detection that way or preventions. So the question, really is kind of how did they get the code? Now, as some background. Revil ceased operations in late 2021. Last year, basically they got a little bit too successful for their own good with some really high-profile attacks against JBS Foods and Kaseya, and this came hot on the heels of Colonial Pipeline being shut down. They are alleged to have some part of that. The U.S. government was very upset with this, to the point of really putting the pressure on Russia in some ways before we turned into our current scenario of no outright hostility. Anyhow, Russia went on in January to announce, January 22, to announce that they had made 14 arrests and Revil was no longer operational. Now, here's the interesting bit. According to Malware Hunter team, ransomware cartel began their operations in 2021, and Palo Alto Networks, this team, came up and said they saw them the next month in like January 2022 start doing their operations. So it starts the theorizing and the speculating. The timing, obviously is going to make anybody wonder if ransomware cartel is just Revil rebranded and they're operating underneath a new name. However, 14 arrests and the infrastructure appears to have gone dark. And just observations in general that Revil's not operating. It looks like, this isn't a rebrand to say. I mean, it is possible that, a bunch of people got arrested, but they weren't all the people that were part of Revil, and so maybe the remnants of folks picked up and renamed themselves, or that even everybody stayed in jail. But who knows? You could even have individual members of Revil who weren't arrested go on to ransomware cartel and bring source code with them, but maybe not all of the source code. And so that's not terribly far-fetched either. And they've got the practical experience. So, essentially they're attractive new hires, just like they would be at any technology company, except in this case, it's total extortion. Anyhow, according to the register, pretty much all of the researchers cited do not believe that Ransomware Cartel is a rebrand of REvil, but they did hold out the idea that, hey, hiring individuals is a possibility because they face the same kind of issues technology in general does, which is trying to find people. Another theory that they have is that Ransomware Cartel was a customer of REvil, and REvil ran ransomware as a service. So REvil goes dark, we're out of money or revenue. What are we going to do? Oh, well, we've got some tools, we got some operation ideas. We'll just, give ourselves a name and go for it. That's another possible origin story. Another is there could be some kind of supplier for REvil or were. And again, same kind of thing. Their revenues get cut. What are we going to do? So I got it. We were already supplying them some tools. Let's go ahead and just add on to that and do our own business. I don't know that that's the case, but it is one of the fascinating things to me about the criminal world is the different supplier relationships that are out there. In fact, I remember CrowdStrike's 2020 Global Threat Report had a great diagram of the different relationships between the threat actor groups and the distribution of tools, and then who operated those. Really showed kind of the intermingling there, with this ecosystem, and that to me was just really wild to take a look at. But going back to the similarities of REvil and Ransomware Cartel, they did notice that the ransom notes are very similar, but those aren't hard to copy. The use of double extortion, but everybody's pretty much doing that these days anyhow. Some methods in the way they generate session secrets. Okay, that's a little bit more on the technique side of things. And the method that they use for data encryption, those are also all similar. But there are some pretty significant differences, as I mentioned earlier, around like the obfuscation is very different. Ransomware Cartel also, as just kind of an additional thing, likes to search for files that are protected by the Windows Data Protection API, and basically collect information from those files. This can include RDP passwords, Wi-Fi keys, credentials saved in browsers, things like that. However, I'm not sure if that difference, how critical that is. The tool that Ransomware Cartel likes to use is called Don Pappy, which is basically a dumper from Windows Data Protection API and pulls information out of that. That tool wasn't released until late 2021, which was after REvil had pretty much gone dark. So, if they were active, they might have just picked it up and started using it too. Either way, it's an interesting story of how the criminal world continues to evolve, how they feed off of each other. They see what somebody else is doing. They think, hey, that looks cool too. Let me try that. And so they adopt that and try and improve their success and the amount of money that they're taking in. In some ways, again, this is kind of that weird comparison between legitimate businesses and these criminal organizations. They will do similar things to or have similar pressures to make sure they're getting good revenue, and that includes copying what other people are doing and trying to boost their revenues. Obviously, though, instead of selling things that people need or want or something like that, these groups are totally into extortion and basically robbing everybody blind, potentially putting to businesses out of existence. If this is interesting to you, go ahead and check out the show notes. Like I said, I found it to be interesting just to see how things change and evolve over time.
All right. Thank you, Jason. I think organized crime has many new definitions these days. And it's not just Tony Soprano and the boys anymore. They've got HR departments now, which is, I guess, a good thing. If you get robbed, you can call and make sure you were treated fairly.
Well, you got to make a claim on, how's my background check doing? Since they got to vet you and make sure you're a legitimate thief.
Well, yeah. I mean,
we got to do the reverse background check. I'm sure you have a good enough restoration.
They were probably doing background checks before everybody else started doing them. Just like, is this person real? Like somebody's trying to get involved in my criminal organization. I mean, I would want to know, But that's just me.
Who is this guy really?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could work at doing business continuity planning for criminal organizations too. Like, I could think about that. Like, what are you going to do when you get raided? Like, if you got a plan, does everybody know where to go? You got an incident response team ready to spring into action, and when the strip club.
What do you do when your infrastructure goes dark because there's been a takedown?
Yeah, the FBI shut down your main server. What are you going to do? Let's go. Come on. Who do you call first? Let's do a little exercise here. If we could do some tabletops, it would be great. Down at the Bada Bing, we can do what happens when the strip club gets raided.
FSB shows up. What do you do?
Exactly. I mean, think that's probably a pretty big burgeoning industry. So maybe we should start a company, Jason. And since it's come on, we can be international
that violates
criminals.
The don't go to jail rule.
Oh yeah, I have that too. But it's like, come on, we could set it up offshore. We'll operate it out of like a friendly island republic somewhere. But
all right.
We'll keep it in mind. Just put a pin in it, and we'll get back to that.
It's a thought.
Yeah, it's just a thought, and we wouldn't really do that, of course, like all our law enforcement friends out there.
No.
Well, I can't speak for Jason because you know how he is, but anyway. And my wife was telling me yesterday, she was like, I shouldn't tell you this, but I was like, what? And then she told me something, and I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't talk about that. And it wasn't anything illegal, but it was something that I could have turned into something illegal. I was like, if I took advantage of this, we'd all go to jail. And she was like, yeah, you would. And I was like, but is it worth the risk? But, we wouldn't do that. All right. And finally, everyone is building space stations, space habitats, space sex dungeons, space sex nightclubs. I don't know, whatever. It's all the rage if you're a billionaire these days. I mean, maybe you've only got like 6 homes and a couple of yachts and you own a single social media network so you can get your message out, but you can't keep up with the Joneses if you don't have a floating space platform to call your own. I mean, it's embarrassing. I mean, wait till Elon and Ye decide to build some kind of floating weirdness, in space, and you will literally have Ye and Elon hanging over you, like up in the sky, looking down on you, like, hello, I'm crazy, that kind of stuff. And Elon, I still don't have my Tesla X, so call me. Or Ye can get me one. I don't care. Either one of you. It doesn't matter. But that's not what the story is really about. The story was about, there were several stories this week about space pollution and all these people wanting to build things. But this was about how to build it. So this new robot is called the E-Walker. And it's used to build this kind of stuff in space. I don't think they actually have a working model yet, but they have it like mathematically worked out. So its official name is the End-Over-End Walking Robot, or E-Walker. And the specs were published in the Frontiers in Robotics and AI journal. And it describes this thing that kind of looks like a large slinky with 7 degrees of freedom. So it can go in any direction, and it can kind of flip end over end and over end over end. And I mean, I figure that one, like when the Terminators show up, they're going to be like giant slinkies. And they're going to be like, if you want to live, throw yourself down these stairs after me. That kind of thing. But if you combine billionaires, how do you say Ye, I think. Billionaires, Ye, maybe a little Pete Davidson thrown in there for luck just to keep things interesting. And then you build the whole thing, turn it loose in space. I mean, what could go wrong? And with psychotic, slinky robots stalking you through the ruins of New York while Stronger blasts out of their little tinny speakers. Enjoy, and that's the news. Thanks, Jason. We'll see you Friday for the wrap-up show.